the moment my mother's wine glass shattered at my feet. I realized love in our house had always come with an invoice. "You've been bleeding this family dry since the day you left," she hissed, right there, in front of everyone. Plates froze mid-air. My brother, Julian, stared at the table. No one spoke. I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. I just looked at her and said, "No, Mom, I just stopped asking you to bleed for me. My name is Fidelis Hargrave, and that was the night my own family decided to put me on trial, for the crime of building a life without them." The sun hung low over Charleston, spilling gold across my mother's backyard. The smell of grilled meat tangled with the sweetness of her roses, and for a second, I almost believed we were still a family. Julian was at the center of the patio, retelling his latest comeback story, and everyone laughed a little too loud, like they were trying to make the lie sound real. My mother, Miriam, poured herself another glass of wine and said brightly, "Your brother's picking up the family name again. Isn't that wonderful?" I nodded, smiling just enough to be polite, the same way you smile when someone mistakes pity for love. A cousin leaned toward me, half drunk and curious. "So, you're still building things?" "Still," I said. "Only now, they stand a bit taller." The laughter died. The air turned thick. Even the jazz humming from her speaker sounded nervous. I reached into my bag, pulled out the brown envelope, and laid it on the wooden table. "That's the deed for Riverside Avenue," I said. The house finally came back to us. My mother's face shifted. Shock. Then something sharper. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered. "You've been bleeding this family dry since the day you left." Silence swallowed the yard. Julian stared at his plate. Nobody moved. I met her eyes, calm as the smoke rising between us. "No, Mom," I said softly. "I just stopped asking you to bleed for me." The words landed heavier than the glass. Somewhere in that silence, love cracked, and the sound was permanent. The clang of steel was the first sound that ever made me feel safe. Back then, I was 16, drowning in silence after my father's funeral, wearing a safety jacket that hung off my shoulders like armor borrowed from someone braver. The men at the shipyard called me "kid" and laughed when I could barely lift the brush to scrape rust off a hull. One of them smirked. "You got more grit than half the men here?" I smiled, even as blood welled at my knuckles. Pain became my proof that I belonged somewhere. At night, I'd sleep in the cab of a truck parked by the Cooper River, textbooks open on my lap. The radio warned about another hurricane coming, the wind rattling the window. I looked out toward the dark water and whispered, "Then I'll build something that doesn't fall." I didn't know it yet, but that sentence would become the blueprint of my life. Years later, driving back through Charleston, I stopped outside the Riverside house, the one I had fought to reclaim. Paint peeled, shutters sagged, but sunlight broke through a cracked window. I stood there, remembering the father who taught me strength and the mother who refused to see it. I'd sent her money once to help with the mortgage. She never said thank you. When I checked the old bank records, I found her signature on a withdrawal slip from the same account I'd used to save her. She'd taken it all. That was when the first piece of love rusted away. I left home because staying meant drowning. But no one tells you the ocean outside isn't kinder. It just teaches you how to swim. Monday mornings were supposed to be quiet. Coffee, the hum of the radio, the comfort of solitude. But that morning, the knock at my door felt like a warning shot. On the mat lay a thick manila envelope, the kind that carries news no one wants. Across the top, Charleston County Court, Civil Case, Nord 04739. And beneath it, Plaintiff, Miriam and Julian Hargrave. I laughed once, a dry sound that caught in my throat. Then came the sting behind my eyes. Inside was the claim, my own mother and brother suing me for unethical acquisition of family property. They wanted the Riverside house back. Every dollar of it, down to the cent I'd scraped together myself. The amount they demanded matched the down payment I'd made. They hadn't come for justice. They'd come to unbuild me. They're suing me for buying back what they sold out. I called my mother. No answer. Called again. Voicemail. So I left a message. My voice steady, though my hands shook. "If this is what family means to you," I said, "then I finally understand why Dad built bridges instead of walls." I hung up before my voice could crack. Outside, rain slid down the window like melted glass, and the cactus on my kitchen counter stood sharp and untouched. They filed a lawsuit to teach me a lesson. I'm just not sure they know which one. 2 weeks after the envelope, I sat across from Leah Grant in her downtown office, a storm tapping against the window. She flipped through my stack of folders with surgical precision, her manicured nails clicking against the paper. "They filed under heritage property law," she said flatly. "It's emotional blackmail dressed as paperwork." The words landed like iron. Leah leaned back, eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Gather everything, every job, every cent. They want proof? We'll drown them in it." That night, I drove to the technical library where my father had worked. The same scent of dust and machine oil clung to the air. The old librarian recognized me, his voice kind but wary. "Your dad's files are still here," he said, sliding out a worn gray box labeled Hargrave. "T." Inside, beneath yellowing bridge designs, I found a sealed envelope marked "For my children." My hands shook as I opened it. My father's handwriting looped steady and certain. "Julian will inherit the family name. Fidelis will inherit the will to build. Never let guilt become your language of love." The words cut through 14 years of silence. I pressed the page to my chest and let myself cry. Not for weakness, but because for the first time, someone had named my worth. Later, back at my apartment, I logged into the family's old bank account. A record blinked back at me. The insurance payout, withdrawn years ago under the signature F. Hargrave. My name, forged by my mother's hand. She hadn't just stolen money, she'd stolen truth. I laid out the papers on my handmade table, the one built from clearance wood and stubbornness. The lamplight turned the files into a battlefield map. If they want to fight me with paper, I thought, I'll make sure the paper cuts deep. When Leah called again, her voice was steady. "They used blood to bind you." "Then I'll use proof," I said, "to unbind myself." The rain outside hammered harder, and for the first time, I didn't flinch at the sound. It reminded me of steel being forged. A month into the case, my apartment had transformed into a fortress of evidence, walls lined with boxes, each labeled with years, receipts, pay stubs. Leah stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "If proof were bricks," she said, "you've built yourself a fortress." I smiled, sliding another folder onto the pile. "A house made of facts. Let's see who can knock it down." Days blurred into nights. The hum of my scanner, a kind of lullaby. Then, in a dusty box tucked behind old blueprints, I found my father's small leather notebook. On the last page, in faint pencil, he'd written, "Debt forgiven, to Fidelis. She owes me nothing." The words trembled in my hands. Love didn't need witnesses, but now it had one. Leah's research brought the next blow. Julian, my golden brother, the family's miracle, had lost everything in a crypto collapse. $186,000 gone. Worse, he'd forged reports to keep my mother from knowing. I stared at the printout, the numbers blurring. "He was given everything," I whispered, and it still wasn't enough. That evening, an email from my mother arrived. "You can still stop this, drop the house, and we'll forget everything," I typed back. "I already forgot you stopped being my family the day you filed that lawsuit." Then hit send without hesitation. Leah came by later with takeout and her recorder in her purse, ready for the next move. We rehearsed my testimony until my voice stopped shaking. When I finally walked through the courthouse hallway for the first pretrial meeting, the polished floor reflected the fluorescent lights like molten steel. Every step echoed with resolve. They had their heritage. I had the will to build, and this time, I wasn't building alone. Monday morning came heavy with silence. The courthouse smelled like dust and oak polish, the kind that clings to history and judgment. I stood beside Leah as the bailiff called the case. Hargrave versus Hargrave. Judge Ellen Worthington read aloud, her voice firm but not unkind. A family matter and a heavy one. My mother sat 2 rows across, her pearls gleaming under the courtroom lights. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Julian sat beside her, head bowed like a child caught in someone else's lie. Victor Ashcombe, my father's old friend and now their attorney, rose first. His voice was polished, rehearsed. This is not about greed. Your Honor, he began. It's about heritage and respect. A daughter took what was never meant for her. My mother's hand trembled dramatically on Julian's arm. I could almost hear the pity she wanted the room to feel. Leah stood next, calm, surgical. We will prove that what Miss Hargrave built was hers, paid by her, earned by her, and blessed by her father's own hand. The room went still. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. Then came the first blow. Ashcombe slid an old photo across the table, my father with both of us as children. She was always jealous, he said. Leah didn't flinch. She lifted a single page instead. The letter my father had written. Judge Worthington read aloud, her voice cutting through the air. Julian will inherit the family name. Fidelis will inherit the will to build. My mother's face drained of color. They pressed on, accusing me of taking money from family accounts. I handed Leah my proof. Years of pay stubs, bank statements, contracts. The judge looked at me directly. Did you ever receive any family aid? Only the kind that comes as guilt, I said. Leah's next move ended any illusion left standing. She played the recording, my mother's voice, brittle and sharp. I couldn't let her win. It would make me look like I failed as a mother. The courtroom erupted. The judge struck her gavel. And then came Julian. When they called him to the stand, he couldn't meet my eyes. Did you agree to sue your sister? The judge asked. Mom said it was the only way to protect Dad's legacy, he whispered. Do you believe that? A pause. No, ma'am. The sound of truth breaking was quieter than I'd imagined. My mother's tears weren't remorse. They were fear. The kind that comes when the story you built starts crumbling in daylight. When the judge finally asked, Miss Hargrave, do you have anything else to say? I stood and said simply, only that love stops being love when it demands a receipt. The room fell silent again, not from shock, but from recognition. The next afternoon, the court ordered an inspection of the Riverside house, the battlefield dressed as evidence. I arrived with Leah, 2 court officers, and Julian trailing behind us like a shadow. My mother didn't come. The air inside the house was thick with dust and memory. Dad used to keep his ledgers in the cellar, Julian murmured. We descended into the damp air of the wine cellar. My flashlight caught a glint of metal on a broken shelf. I reached for it, a wooden box, edges splintered. Inside, an old notebook, its pages yellowed but intact. My heart tightened as I turned to the last page. Written in pencil, faint but clear. Debt forgiven, to Fidelis. She owes me nothing. I couldn't breathe for a moment. Leah took a photo, then another. Proof, not just in ink, but in love. I carried the notebook upstairs, laid it on the dusty table, and turned to Julian. He already gave it back to us. Julian, I said softly. We just didn't know how to keep it. Julian's eyes filled, his lips trembling. He believed in you, he whispered. He always did. By evening, the news had spread. My mother fainted when she heard about the notebook. Reporters were already calling Leah for comment. Rumor says they might withdraw, one asked over the phone. Leah's voice was calm. They should. There's nothing left to take. When everyone left, I stayed behind. The sun sank low, painting the room in amber light. I sat on the cellar steps, the notebook open in my lap. My fingers traced the penciled words again. He wrote it in pencil, I whispered, so it could fade, but not disappear. I brushed the dust away until the letters gleamed faintly under the last light of day. This was never about the house. It was about who could stand inside it without lying. The courtroom glowed with morning light streaming through the stained glass, painting the oak walls in gold. It felt more like a sanctuary than a court of law. Reporters lined the back benches. A few of my coworkers sat quietly in support. My mother sat motionless beside her lawyer, her pearls dull under the light. Julian stared straight ahead, his hands clenched tight, as if holding something that had already slipped away. Leah rose first, voice steady. The late Mr. Hargrave left one truth: debt forgiven. His daughter honored it not with words, but with work. She placed the notebook, the letter, the recording, and the bank statements in front of the judge. Each piece landed like a stone in still water. Judge Worthington nodded slowly. Ashcombe exhaled, turning to my mother. Mrs. Hargrave, I advise withdrawal. Her chin lifted. No, I can't lose to her, not my own daughter. The judge read aloud from my father's letter. Fidelis will inherit the will to build. The sound echoed like a bell tolling for everything that had rotted between us. Julian broke first, shoulders shaking. When the judge asked if I wished to speak, I stood. If inheritance is meant to chain me to guilt, then I choose to inherit nothing. I worked for what I own, and I forgive what I can't forget. Judge Worthington brought the gavel down 3 times. Case dismissed with malice. The plaintiff will pay all legal fees. This court finds no merit, only manipulation. Outside, the crowd erupted. A daughter sued by her own family, and won! Someone shouted. Cameras flashed. As I walked past the courthouse steps, sunlight caught the silver pen in my hand, the one that had signed my freedom. Family isn't about who inherits, the judge had said. Then I guess, I whispered, I'm the last builder standing. 2 months after the verdict, Charleston had gone quiet. The noise of courtrooms and cameras had faded, leaving only the kind of silence that forces you to listen to your own breath. One morning, a letter arrived from the hospital, my mother's handwriting shaky and uneven. I wanted to protect the family name. It said, I forgot you were the family. There was no apology, just that single line, trembling with what she couldn't say. I folded it once and placed it beside my father's photo on the mantel. Some truths didn't need confrontation. They just needed to rest. Julian left town soon after. He didn't call. He only left a note under my door. You were right about Dad. I wasn't ready to build anything. But you did. I slipped it into my wallet. Not for comfort, but as proof that maybe he'd finally seen me clearly. By late afternoon, I was back at Riverside, watching sunlight scatter across the half-painted walls. Workers moved around me, their brushes tapping like soft heartbeats. I climbed the ladder, dusted the plaque my father once made, and rehung it on the front wall. Build what you can't inherit. The light caught the first word, build, and the room seemed to breathe again. Later, while cleaning the study, I found an unopened envelope hidden in an old drawer. My father's writing, addressed to my mother. Miriam, love them both. Even when they build different homes, I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Maybe the letters were never meant to be read. Maybe they were meant to remind us that silence, too, can heal. A year later, the backyard of Riverside was alive again. But this time, the air didn't weigh heavy with judgment. The oak tree stretched wider. String lights glowed like soft fireflies, and laughter drifted across the yard. Smoke rose from the grill, curling into the pink light of late spring. I carried out a tray of marinated meat, while a few of my students, kids who'd aged out of the foster system and found work through the workshop, hung paper lanterns from the branches. One girl wiped her hands on her jeans and asked, "You built this place all by yourself?" I smiled. "No. I built the part of myself that could." The crowd that evening was a patchwork of neighbors, carpenters, welders, and friends. Family by choice. Someone asked, "Is this the famous Hargrave house?" I laughed. It used to be. Now it's everyone's. I set my old house keys on the same wooden table where everything once fell apart. No one gasped this time. No one whispered. They just raised their glasses. The way people do when peace finally replaces pride. At the edge of the yard, I saw Julian watching from the gate. He didn't come closer, just nodded once before walking away. I nodded back. That was enough. I lifted my glass, the sunset flashing off the steel bridge beyond the yard. Every key I've ever held was earned, not given. And for the first time, family wasn't a word I feared. It was one I'd finally built,